Okay, here we are looking at Dave's amazing movement, and look at him go. That's awesome. So as you can see here, everything is going down and back. Well, pretty much everything. And so we're going to go into this movement a little bit closer. So this is a reach. So really, we're just following that sequence of movement. Nothing else is going on. So if I just take this down here, I've done my little white skeleton just to sort of show that I'm looking for what happens at the end of this movement before we get that point of change. So you can see that drop in, and there we come out. So that's the point that we're looking at. So if you've got your video there. So let me just drop that in place. So what we want to find out is what's moving and what those joints are feeling. And then we can work out what muscles are reacting. So from here, you can see here that if I draw that in, we look at that arm, we can see actually that this gap has got bigger, because what's happened is the humerus it's come down, and it's gone forward and down and right tilt, and then we've got a right rotation. And so in the sagittal plane, the joint is feeling flexing, because this gap is widening here. And the arm has come across that midline, which means that in the frontal plane, we're going to be feeling abduction. And I'm looking at the hand there, so I think that shoulder is feeling internal rotation at the shoulder. So what's important to know straight away is that when we saw this movement, we saw that from here, everything is coming down. Everything is going right. At that point there, the pelvis is actually going back, but most things that are happening are down and round to the right. So the next thing that we want to look at here is the right shoulder. So, and we're looking at this gap here. So in that right shoulder, what's happening is the humerus again is coming down. So let's go here. It's coming down, and it's going right and right rotate. And there's a right tilt in there as well. So what the joint is actually feeling is it's feeling extending, and it's feeling adducting, and it's feeling external rotation because of the way he's holding that ball there. And then as he comes down, we've got that rotation in that drop of height. And then we want to have a look at what's happening in the torso. So let me change colour just as he's moving there. I've just got to wait for him to finish. So again, what we're seeing happen is the spine is coming forward, and it's coming down. It's going right and anterior. So that would be that forward roll. We want to look at what's happening at the side. So which side is getting shorter? Have we got right tilt or left tilt? So what we're looking for is that rib cage to get closer to that pelvis. So as we come down, that gap's getting closer on that right hand side. So we've got that right tilt. And as Dave brings the ball round, that's taking that pelvis around to the right, which means that the spine is going to be feeling a left rotation. So those of you that know your spine motions, you'll know that that is a type 1, which is like golf. And then from here, the next bone that we want to go to, so we got, that was our in sequence, we got 1 and we had 2. So now we want to come over to the hip. So let's have a look at what's going on in the hip here. So when we're looking to work out what's going on in the hip, we really want to know what's happening with the pelvis. So the pelvis is going down and it's going back. You can see how that kicks lower there. And it's going anterior. And we've got let's have a look, which way is that tilting? So can you see the right or the left drop? That's what we're looking at here. So as we come into that, so we've got a left tilt and a right rotation. So what are we expecting that left joint to feel at that hip? So as it comes down, what's happening at that left hip in the sagittal plane here is getting shorter, so it's feeling the squeeze, so we're getting flexion. And then in the frontal plane, we want to be thinking about whether this is feeling a squeeze or whether it's widening. So as he comes down here, that's being driven round, and have a look at what's happening to the knee. So we're getting abduction because that gap is getting wider. Wider here. So that's abduction. And then in the transverse plane, let's have a look at what happens. That as that reach spins round, we're getting external rotation in that hip. And if you're not sure, just look at the body driving down and around to the right and what's happening in that femur at the same time. So we've got that posterior tilt in that femur. Then we want to have a look at what's going on in our right hip. So we've come down here. Let's kind of come down like that. And then in that right hip. So as that pelvis comes around to the right, so the pelvis is going back and down and anterior, left tilt, right rotation, we're actually feeling that flexion in the sagittal plane, the squeeze at the front, and then we're feeling a closing here. So as he comes down, you can see that closes So that's going to be feeling adduction and internal rotation. And then we're moving up the body and we come to the left foot first of all. So let's have a look at what's happening in that ankle. Now, if you can't see what's going on in that foot because I've drawn over it, look at what's happening or what you can see at that leg. So in that, you can see that the femur is going back and it's going down. And it's going to the right. It's going posterior. And then you've got that right rotation. And then at the tib fib here, we've got that's going forward. And it's going right tilt. There. And right rotation. Which means that at the ankle here, we're going to be feeling dorsiflexion. And if we're feeling dorsiflexion, it means that we have to be feeling eversion. And we have to be feeling abduction. And that's the abduction happening here at that subtalar joint. So now we move on to the right ankle. And again, it's looking at what's happening in that femur and looking at what's happening at that tib fib. So as we come down there, that tib fib is turning out, driven by that reach. And so what happens here is we get that plantar flexion, and we get plantar flexion, and then if we've got plantar flexion, that's kicking out, then we're going to be getting an inversion as that foot starts to kick away, and adduction as this gap gets closer. Now, if that's happening at the ankle, we can work out what's happening at the foot. So on that left foot, we're seeing that dorsiflexion and we're seeing inversion. In that frontal plane, and we're seeing abduction in that transverse plane. And that's really because what's happening here is the calcaneus is going to be right tilting and rotating to the right. So that foot really turns the planes against themselves. But we know that if that's feeling eversion in the ankle, then it will be feeling inversion at the midfoot there. So when we move on to the right, then here the calcaneus again is tilting to the right, and it's right rotating. And so in that midfoot here, we're feeling plantar flexion and eversion, and then adduction, as we get that firm foot to kick us off. So let's have a look at that again. You can just see that kicking out of my little stick men. Then we look at this movement on the way out and start to see that the point that we would be interested in here is as the movement comes out, it's going to be just here. So just before that movement of coming back. So that point of change, and then we can work out the energy escape. So let's have a little look and write this out. And we can then work out what muscles are reacting to what we're seeing. So over here, let's move it back to, let's get rid of Dave for the moment. In that left shoulder, we had flexing and abducting and internally rotating. And what we saw happening was we saw the humerus go forward, down, right tilt, and right rotate. Right rotate. And in the right shoulder, we saw that humerus going down and back in that movement. So we got that extension and the adduction and the external rotation. So the humerus was going forward, and it was, in fact, the humerus on the right shoulder was going back, down, right tilt, and right rotate. Now, if you see something different, that's absolutely fine. But what is important is that we're asking why that's happening. Why hasn't Dave just collapsed in a heap on the floor there? What is it that's keeping him upright? And the more we ask these questions, the more we start to see what's happening at each joint. And then we get a better idea of the muscles that are reacting. So in that torso, we saw that it was a type 1, which was golf, and it was flexing and right tilt and left rotation. And that was because the spine was going forward, down, right. And was it anterior or was it posterior? Good. And was it right tilt or left tilt? Right tilt and left rotation because of what was happening and what we saw at that pelvis. So what I'm going to do now is going to get a nice new flashy colour to make this look nice. And I'm going to put in number 3 here. That's our third one. So what we saw at that hip was flexing. We saw abducting as we saw that gap widen in that frontal plane an external rotation as it was driven away. And in the right hip, again, that was flexing. But adducting and internally rotating. So this is how you'd fill in that form. And we worked this out because we knew that the pelvis was going back, unlike everything else, and down. And was it going posterior or was it going anterior? Good. And was that going right tilt or left tilt? Oh, there we go. I gave it away by writing it at exactly the same time. And then we move on to the knees. So this is number 4 on the score. And on that left knee, we said that we saw flexing because there was a drop in height. So remember, to get flexion, you get a drop in that height. And we saw abduction. So that's your Elvis Presley knee. And we saw external rotation as that movement was driven. And in that femur, we worked that out because we saw the femur going back because of this. And we saw it going down. And was the femur going anterior or was it going posterior? Nice. So it's going posterior. And was it going left or was it going right? It's going round to the right. And you may want to have a look at that again. And we had a right rotation. You could also see that the tib fib was going forward. And was that going anterior or posterior? Good. Anterior. And right tilt. And right rotation. Just checking my lines out here. Yep, so in that right knee, that's it. So now we've got the ankle. So with the right ankle, we saw, I'm just going to change the colour to make it a little bit easier. Okay, so at that left ankle, we had the closing of the gap. And that closing of the gap, that accepting of the floor. So if we have a little look back here. So we've got a foot as that goes into the floor. And that's dorsiflexion. And with dorsiflexion, we get eversion and abduction. So what's happening is the calcaneus or calcaneus, so we can't actually see that, that's at the back there, that's actually giving it a right tilt and a right rotation. So the cowl goes right tilt and right rotation. Now, because we can see that at the ankle, at that subtalar joint, then that does give us information about what we think and what we predict to be happening in that whoop, the whoop foot. So we've got our right ankle. Let's have a look here. So as it comes round, the left one goes, and as that goes, this one starts to come into plantar flexion and we get a whoop. You can hear it, I'm sure. So that right ankle feels plantar flexion. And it does that because here that calcaneus is tilting to the right, and then it's being that right rotation driven round. So we're getting plantar flexion, inversion, and adduction. Or whoop. Now, because we know this, and we know that there's the coupling at the foot and ankle, we know that at the foot, if the ankle is feeling this, then at the foot, it's going to be dorsiflexion, because we're on the floor. So this, unless there was something underneath the foot, this is what we predict should be happening. We should be getting that dorsiflexion. And then in the frontal plane, that's because of the way the calcaneus moves and how that's driven forward by the tib fib, we're going to be feeling the opposite in that frontal plane. So we get that inversion and an abduction. And then on the right foot, we get plantar flexion and eversion and adduction. So from this now, we can then go away and we can go and think, right, okay, so this is the skill, this is the order in which it's happening, and these are the bones that I'm expecting to see moving, and this is why. And it's important to mention that if you're not seeing this, it doesn't make it right or wrong. It just means that your client is showing you their unique way of doing it. But teaching your eyes to question it like this will give you the tools to go, oh, I was expecting to see this happen at the knee, and so therefore I was expecting to see this happen at the foot or the hip. And so if it doesn't happen, then you're just seeing a different skill that your client has chosen. But it's good to see that, because if they show you a movement that doesn't feel great to them, then you can work on their skill in different areas. It also, importantly, means that you never have to ask your client again what muscles they're feeling, because from all of this, you know exactly which muscles they're feeling, because they're feeling the muscles that lengthen across these joints that are being hit. So if we have a look at, first of all, the left shoulder, what's the energy escape? What's the muscle that's lengthening as Dave comes in here? So when we're looking at the energy escape, stop, Dave, stop. There. So we're looking at this is getting energy escape. So we're getting the posterior delts, we're getting teres, and we're getting the lats. And that's what's decelerating that movement and getting us back out. So we're going as far as the body will go according to its skill. And then the muscle goes, whoa! And in the right shoulder, so there we're getting anterior delts and we're getting pec coming through there. And we're getting anterior delts and a bit of pec. Then we go into the torso. So what muscles being worked there? Pretty much everything around the torso. So we're getting everything that's wrapped around the spine. Then when we move on to the hip, because of the way that that opens in that left hip, we'd be getting adductors. And then in the right hip, you're getting that energy escape here. So that's going to be looking at the glutes. And I'm going to change my colour. And then we move on to the knee. So at the knee, what muscles do you think we're going to be working? So in that left knee, going to be quads, that's all quaddy. And then on the right knee, that's all quaddy too. And then when we come back to the foot, so in that left ankle, that's right, we get the soleus at the back here. And then on the right, we're going to get anterior tibularis, which sounds much better if Francesca says it. So you have to ask Francesca to say it. Anterior tibularis. And then we have the perineal on the left foot and the right foot. So coming around here. So let me just pop that in here quickly. And rather than you waiting, I shall just press pause. So in a little bit of Blue Peter fashion there, we've got posterior delts for the shoulder, anterior delts, all of the core, adductors, glutes, then it's quaddy for the knee, and then we've got around the ankle, we've got soleus, and through the right, anterior tibularis, and then on the left and right foot, we have perineals. So now what I want you to do is to see if you can reverse that and look at that on the way out, if you haven't already. So what would be the point that we'd be interested in on the way out? There. And that's the movement I'm going to be interested in just before he gets to the top. So we're starting off with that left shoulder. We're in flexion, abduction and external rotation. And that right shoulder, flexion, abduction, internal rotation. And I'm going to leave you to have a little go at that. I hope this has been useful. And if you've got any questions, then feel free to message me in activities. And I will see you all on Thursday.